Okay, so we're going to start with a reconstruction of Strathergy Round in the 4th century. And Strathergy is the most extensive of the Cornish Roman settlements which has yet been excavated, and Henry has already referred to my report. As you will have gathered from my the introduction, I spent a lot of time dealing with Cornwall in my archaeological career, and it became apparent when I first started working down here that Cornwall and Devon had a very different archaeology in the Roman period to that of many other parts of the country. On the screen here, we have a picture of the more extreme of the variations, the courtyard houses in West Penwith, which I'm not going to talk about. And I'm going to concentrate on the finds, however, from a few of these sites, but mainly from the rounds, the enclosed sites, which form the focus of the settlement in the Roman period in Cornwall. I've given the title of a publication which updates my Strathergy report, and I'll give you the titles of these at the end in case anyone would like them. And of course, all the data on publications which I've put up will be available on the record of this. Strathergy Round was dug in 73 and for various reasons was not fully published in 2004. But because of the extensive size of the site, it provided very considerable groups of artifacts of all periods. And I need to pay tribute to that as a basis for studies. I think it's pertinent to say that Cornwall has its own ceramic tradition using pottery from the lizard down in Cornwall. I make no hesitation in using this map from the Neolithic period because the production of pottery down here of Gabroic is continuous from the early Neolithic right the way through to the Norman period. And this is a factor to remember. Whether in fact pottery was made down near the source, or whether, as is more likely, it was made in the various settlements around the county is unclear. But many people outside Cornwall are totally unaware that Cornwall has its own distinctive ceramic tradition. It's using pottery, but the styles of pottery in Cornwall broadly mirror those of the Poole Harbour black burnished wares. And this provides some of our principal chronology for the sites, because radiocarbon dating does not yet necessarily provide us with the definition in terms of fine time that we need. The fabric, of course, was not suitable for making pottery mortars, and this is something we'll come on to. And I'll flag up here something which is again important. The general material economy in Cornwall was not coin using, and I think that's significant because effectively it had a much more cohesive style than those which relied on coinage. And the continuance of later Roman period artifacts goes through the 5th century and indeed into the early 6th. So much of what I'm going to be saying, while relevant to the Roman period, would also refer broadly to the 5th century in Cornwall as well. Now, the first work on stone artifacts in Cornwall was done by a pioneer of Cornish archaeology before the Second World War, Colonel Hurst down in West Penwith. And I give here a couple of his publications identifying Cornish stone materia. Then we have the Strathergy Round, which resulted in a couple of publications of my own, the Strathergy Report, and 2 subsequent reports, which are now in the Cornish Archaeological Journal. I'm going to be talking about 3 distinctive stonework types: mortars, Strathergy Bowls, which are effectively large mortars, we'll have another word to say about that, and modelled stone weights. Elven and Grisen are most commonly used for the mortars and bowls. Weights use a slightly larger variety of stone. And we have an introductory example of each on the screen. Grisen is an altered form of granite, and the 2 main sources in Cornwall are on the St Austell granite and at Tregonning Hill, which is in the Mounts Bay area, though there are 1 or 2 smaller sources around the place. Grison was also extensively used for rotary querns in Cornwall in the Cornish period. Elven, however, is very much more common through Cornwall. This map, produced for me by Roger Taylor, who's done all the petrological work on the artefacts I'm dealing with. This map shows slightly schematically the areas where the dikes of Elven principally occur around the various granite intrusions. Sorry, we go back one. And you can see that they occur around the principal granites, indeed Bodmin, and indeed do occur, that Elven is, it does occur in Devon as well. This map was published in the first of my articles on the bowls, published back in the 1990s. Now, looking first at early stone mortars in Cornwall, the earliest ones appear directly to copy pottery mortaria types. The artefact I'm showing here is a reconstruction drawing of that of Treviska Round, which appears to have stopped at occupation around the middle of the 2nd century AD. So that gives us a fairly good date for that particular bowl. As we go on through the Cornish Roman period, we find a range of forms which gradually get simpler, continuing through to the 6th century. The simpler forms are generally rather more common. It's probably true to say that for the excavated sites in Cornwall, pretty well everyone will have produced a fragment of one of these mortars, normally made of Elven. And we do know that most of these mortars were probably made on site where people were living. This is a view of the unfinished mortar disposed of at Strathergy, not strictly stratified. This is the colour picture shows the working of the top of the rim and the beginning of the working to reduce the interior. And then we have a plan view and a side view as well. A number of other round sites have produced artefacts of this type, partly manufactured, but none as complete and such a graphic illustration of production as this. But I do see very much the production of the stone mortars as being a feature of the settlement sites, the rounds, which are normally, if you like, multiple small groupings of farmhouses. We have a good example, and the only complete example known to me, which turned up a few years ago, ploughed up in a field. This one comes from a site called Tresmere, well over to the east in Cornwall. And we have at the bottom a view with the lip, and then the piece turned over, you can see the base nicely worked, and then the drawing, which shows all the features that you need to know. These are not very much datable beyond the early rim forms, but we are still finding out things about them. The example on the screen now comes from a recent excavation by AC Archaeology at Nandsleden near Newquay. And this one appears to be modelled on an artefact either of metal or glass, some form of ribbed bowl. And in context, this is broadly 2nd century. The drawing here shows you the side view with the ribs very clearly shown. And the colour view shows you the inverted image showing the bottom of the spout and then these ribs running round it. This is the first piece I've seen which is specifically like this, but I'm sure that there are new types still emerging. Cornish material does on occasion get out into other parts of the country. I show on the screen here a piece of a Cornish mortarium from Cornwall, made in this case of Grison, not Elven, which is rather less usual. And this one comes from a 3rd century context in Rack Street in Exeter, although I would have thought the rim form was 2nd century rather than later. Grison examples cover about 20% of the examples known. with occasional granite as well. Just a reminder, of course, that many other areas produce stone mortars, particularly those areas where the local potting clays were not suitable for making vessels used for pounding. And this is just one example of sandstone from the Bishop's Lydiard area of Somerset, which was found in a well in Queen Street in Exeter. Now, at some point in the Roman period, probably during the later 2nd century, much larger vessels, anything up to half a metre across, begin to be found. We see one of the first examples on the screen here, and this shows very clearly the skeuomorphic picture of the handle, which normally are paired, sometimes are 4. There are far fewer of these. They're not that frequent. Perhaps we have parts of 20 to 30 overall, as opposed to at least double that number of Cornish mortars. But we don't know at the moment exactly what they're used for. Inside, they do tend to be heavily worn, and some of them are worn through to leave hollows. These were first identified clearly at Strathergy, and the screen now shows a range of the reconstructed drawings. None were found complete, and a very nice example of the same piece shown inside, outside and in, and an additional one there shown on the outside. This one here, the bottom view, shows very nicely the wearing there. The presence of these handles appears to be something which again comes through possibly from a metalwork tradition. On the screen now is a picture of the kind of metal bowl which would have an upstanding handle and which could have given rise to these handles, which possibly was the prototype for the unique so far Trotloy tin bowl found in a tin ground near Newquay a while back now, but probably deposited in the 4th century. So these skeuomorphic handles, if you like, are copied through from other materials, I think, and in some way define these large vessels. It's rather difficult, however, to really conceive what kind of food preparation would require these very large containers. Occasionally, these distinctive bowls, and we refer to these handled vessels as Strathergy bowls as opposed to mortars. Occasionally, these are found across southern Britain, and I give here a drawing, redrawn, of a Grison bowl, a very complete one, from Richborough, found in the 19th century. And there are also finds known to me more recently from Lydney and from London. A quick look at a couple of recent finds, and these happen to be the only 2 complete Strathergy bowls which I know about. The first was found on a building site, but effectively unstratified at Redruth about 15 years ago now. And we see the reconstruction drawing, a rather pathetic attempt to paired handles, and in the top view, the spout. And in this case, this vessel does have a spout. Some of the Strathergy ones, which were reconstructible, definitely did not. And you can again see the interior looking rather worn, and the fact in this case, the wear has gone through to a hole at the bottom. The second example, surprisingly, comes from East Dartmoor. A map up here shows the position of the find. We have a drawing showing a rather more definitive handle than the Redruth bowl, and then an interior view showing again the worn shape and a crack beginning to form where the vessel had worn to an extent down the bottom so that it was beginning to crack. So these artifacts present something rather distinctive, which I think people who are studying artifacts from Roman Britain should be aware of, because they do occasionally come out into the other parts of the province, apart from being important in their own sake. It's interesting so far that the handled bowl found in a modern ditch clearance at Chagford, which I'm showing you now, is the only example of these handled bowls from Devon we know about so far. But I'm sure that we've got a lot more to find out about these. And finally, to finish, a quick word about weights. Stone weights appear during the 2nd century in Cornwall, continue through in the later period. The screen shows a couple of pictures of the Greisenized granite stone weight, which appears to copy a stone bell, which comes from a late 3rd or early 4th century pit at Strathergy. And a number of other examples may indeed copy other forms of metal. This is just a collection of specimens showing different varieties. There's no tradition of working these weights in stone in the pre-Roman period, and it's unclear what they were actually used for. The weight range of these weights comes from about under half a kilometre to nearly 8 kilos. And they obviously have something to do with the mensuration tradition. I have done a quite detailed study, which was published in the literature, which looks at the relationship of their weights to possible standards in use in the Roman Empire, but nothing distinctive could come out of this. So in summary, looking at this overall group of distinctive material, these bowls and weights are distinctively Cornish and reflect aspects of Roman material culture, which is confined to the west end of the southwest peninsula. It's interesting that copying metal or glass suggests a richer suite of artifacts were actually being in use than survives to us today. The hints, for example, that ribbed bowl from Nansledden could be copying a ribbed glass bowl. The fact that the two categories, the bowls and the mortars, seem to be to do with food preparation suggests some changes in eating practice for which no provision was made in the Iron Age, some possible borrowing from the Roman world. And of course, we do have a long range of bowl forms in the local pottery, which suggest that some practices domestically were changing through eating. And finally, a reminder that the largely non-monetary economy, which I talked about briefly just at the beginning, survives through to the early 6th century. And where we can't provide a definite date for a particular artifact from its context, you therefore have a very long time band for these periods. At the bottom, I've put the references to my 2 recently published papers, one of which is a brief attempt to update the report on Strathergy, including the material I've been talking about today, and the other is a more focused update on the stone artifacts which have been found recently. Thank you.